Students often ask you, too, about your age.
Yes, but I can't tell them. I don't know. You see, I arrested my age 25 years ago. We create age, of course, through thought, too. We have a habit of counting birthdays and thinking of ourselves as getting older, and we do. I had sufficient age. I looked essentially the way I do now 25 years ago. At that point, I said, no more counting birthdays, and hereafter I thought of myself as being ageless. And things have stayed rather the way they were. I haven't gotten younger, but I don't see any point in that. I can operate just fine as I am. You see, when you have learned the lessons of the seasons of life before, you have no wish to return to a prior season of life.
Right. Well, one of the explanations may be that you've eliminated a lot of hang-ups and barriers, and the channel is free for this flow of energy. Would you like to comment any further on that?
Oh, yes, it's necessary to remove a whole lot of barriers, of course, to get rid of all your hang-ups, your mindsets, and so on. Well, this is a subject that if I dealt with it in short order, I wouldn't deal with it very adequately, of course. I can tell you that it's a matter of living all the good things you believe in the beginning, because we usually believe way beyond what we live. So that's the way I started. I just took them one by one and worked on them. And if I could think of something I was doing that I knew I shouldn't be doing, I simply quit. For instance, I realized at one point that I wasn't living on what you would call a good health diet. So I quit that and started living on a good health diet, started practicing prevention. All things known to be bad for your health, I simply cut out before I got sick. And then, if you can think of something you're doing that you know you shouldn't be doing, you can easily cut it out. But there's a more difficult thing than that. When you think of something that you know you should be doing that you aren't doing, now that might take a little more time. For instance, I wasn't being forgiving enough toward myself. Toward others, yes, no problem there. But toward myself, if I did something that wasn't the highest, I would say to myself, you ought to know better. And then one time, I was looking at myself in the mirror as I combed my hair, and I said, you vain thing. Why should you think you ought to know better when you forgive everyone else for not knowing better? You know better than they are. You must forgive yourself as readily as you forgive them, and then take a further step. Use all that energy you've been using on condemning yourself, on improving yourself. And then I started to get somewhere, because, you know, there's only one person you can change, and that person is yourself. Now, of course, many have to get rid of things like worry habits and anger habits and fear habits. But there's another thing, too. We must find our job in the life pattern, because every one of us has a job, and we won't be happy until we find it. And you can work in two ways. You know, it's your higher nature that knows what your job is, and so put yourself into inspirational circumstances so you will have an awakening of your higher nature and know what your job is. And the other way, since you already undoubtedly have had some awakenings, is to ask yourself, what do I like to do?
Right.
Because if it's your job, you will like to do it, and you will do it as easily and joyously as I walk my pilgrimage.
We emphasize in the Career Laboratory that one should know their interests, their personalities, and begin to look at these possibilities. Also the values, the important goals of life that are important to people. Who are you and what are you? And I believe you indicated there's a higher self and a lower self. And sometimes this is referred to as the ego on one hand, and the higher self, the transpersonal self, the potential self that we could become, the real, the non-phony. The non-role playing is to find that real self that wants to express.
It's given all kinds of names. You're right there.
But we tend to have energy for those things that we're interested in, aren't we?
Of course, this is true. And it is quite true that your higher self, your self, which is, well, I would say God-centered, being a religious woman, or centered in the good of the whole, you see, that self is your real self. The self-centered nature isn't your real self at all, you see. It's the other that's your real self.
So getting to the higher self instead of the lower self is to get rid of the hang-ups then, really.
Oh, yes, I should say so. When that governs your life, all of these things are gone. But on the other hand, before it governs your life, there are techniques that you can use to get rid of some of the hang-ups, because that will help you to do enough inner growing, you see, so that your life will be governed by the higher self.
You, of course, travel quite a bit, and you observe a lot of young people in different kinds of lifestyles. And one of the things now medical doctors are saying is that we choose the habits and conditions or the styles that we live, and this along with preventive medicine. Now, you mentioned eating. You're a vegetarian.
Oh, yes, have been for 35 years.
And you attribute this somewhat to your good health. And how about exercise? The doctors are saying everybody should exercise.
I get plenty of exercise walking. And of course, actually, I not only am a vegetarian, and let me give you one good reason for being a vegetarian. My original reason was that I don't ask anyone to do for me things I wouldn't do for myself. But do you know it takes many, many times the land to raise the creature and eat the creature as it would to raise the vegetables or fruits or grains and eat them? And I would want to see the maximum number of people fed. That's another good reason for becoming a vegetarian. I have also cut out things like white flour and white sugar and fried things and highly seasoned things. And of course, I live mostly on fresh fruits and fresh vegetables and the nuts and seeds and the whole grains. And I guess the best form of milk products would be yogurt and buttermilk, probably. I do eat cheese if it's real cheese. Now, also, certainly I get enough exercise. Everybody should. I also get enough rest. Everybody should. But you see, aside from this, I think no negative thoughts. This is so very, very important. And of course, also, a path of service is extremely important.
We try to emphasize that work can be a path of service in all of our lives, that we can express ourselves and fulfill ourselves in serving one another. And this is where the real enjoyment comes. And persons who perhaps do not find their calling and maybe don't have the positive attitude toward work are the ones that are bored and frustrated. It does affect their entire lives.
You're right, of course. And I stress that anytime you feel rather low, as people say, then go out and help somebody else. Find something you can do to help somebody else, and it'll pick you right up.
Right. Now, you've mentioned lack of forgiveness or a form of energy turned within, and of course we know of fear and anxiety. All these things, I think you're saying that they live in us as our enemy.
Of course.
And in other words, if we have to forgive ourselves and rid ourselves, otherwise we're suffering the consequences, aren't we?
Yes, and of course what happens is that we hurt ourselves constantly by getting ourselves out of harmony. Now, if someone would do the meanest thing to me, my automatic reaction would be one of the deepest compassion for this out of harmony person who is able to do mean things. And I would never hurt myself by a wrong reaction of bitterness or anger. You see, we really have complete control over whether we will be hurt psychologically or spiritually or not, because, you know, we can only be hurt by our own wrong actions, and we have control over our actions, or our own wrong reactions, which are tricky, but we have control over them too, or our inaction in some situation that demands action of us. And when we realize this, of course, why, if we have good sense, we just simply stop hurting ourselves and start always thinking things on the positive side and doing things on the positive side and saying things on the positive side.